Children, as you can see, are strong, healthy,
and well fed.
Well fed. I always knew where I stood with Alex's dad because he said things as they were, and he did not play head games. He would tell me what was on his mind, and I ended up liking and respecting him for that because I didn't have to read between the lines. He was open and very honest. I also realized I could be the same way. He would take things from me much better than he would from his own son. So if there was something hard to tell him, I was usually the one who had to say it. And I'm sure he often considered me quite bossy.
Oh, yes.
I run a tight ship, you know. Even when I was looking after Grandpa. When he got older, I would remind him, because I had to remind him to take his meds, check his blood sugar, eat properly, made sure fit for a walk. So, yeah, a little bit on the bossy side.
Clean.
But it was all just to take care of him. Alex's dad was very self-sufficient because everything he had to endure in his life. Even in his senior years, Grandpa took care of all his medical appointments. In fact, Grandpa drove his car up until about a year ago. And the only time I started to get involved in his health care was just about 10 years ago when Grandpa was diagnosed with esophageal cancer. We met with the surgeon, who appeared a little apprehensive to operate on a man in his 80s with such a complex medical history. But Grandpa's attitude was just do it. And if he died on the operating table, he died. It was a tough surgery. His stomach had to be made into his esophagus, and he had to be hooked up to a feeding tube for several weeks while things healed. But he made it through and did much better than some of the younger patients. This brings me to the next time when I knew I was really part of the Ivan family. It was during one of the visits to the hospital after his surgery. There was Grandpa lying in the hospital bed, no energy, he was barely coping. He desperately needed a shave, which I thought would make him feel better, and Grandma agreed. But Grandma was too nervous to shave him, worrying that she might cut him. So I looked at him and said, "Do you trust me, Grandpa? I've never shaved a face, only legs before." So with the help of the man across from him who talked me through the whole procedure, I gave Grandpa a shave. He must have trusted me because I had a sharp blade in my hands and no prior face shaving experience. After Grandpa passed away about 3 years ago, and Grandpa's memory was not as reliable, I started to become his memory. I kept track of and drove him to his medical appointments, and there was lots of specialists and all sorts of things. When we met with the doctors and the specialists, I would always introduce myself as his favorite daughter-in-law.
The only one.
That's why I got the favorite. Grandpa would sometimes beat me to it and introduce me the same way. I figured I must have finally convinced him. Grandpa did not bother to carry a list of his multiple medications because I knew I carried one in my purse, and I memorized his complicated medical history so I could be his advocate. So there we would sit, sometimes for a couple of hours, waiting for the doctor, and in typical Grandpa form, he would announce very loudly that he believed the doctor was not even in the building. Why did he have to see the doctor at all? And they don't do anything for him anyways. It was a never dull moment because you would never know what was coming he was going to say next. Grandpa also loved to meet and talk with people. One of his specialties was guessing people's nationalities, and usually he was bang on. While he was still living at the condominium, he would drop in for a social tea time at the neighborhood church. But because his memory was not as it used to be, I would phone him that day to remind him to get ready so he could enjoy his social gathering. It was only the last few years that Grandpa was relying more on us. For many years we relied on him. He was always there, and if something needed to be fixed, Grandpa could do it. He would fix the kids' bikes or mend a chair. He would drop off or pick up a child if we were stuck. He was very generous to Alex and I, and he invested money in his grandchildren's educations. He was very proud of all his grandchildren, all their academic successes and all their athletic successes. He was very proud of the children who were athletic. Grandpa was athletic. When he heard that our eldest would be renting a room at York University because the commute was getting too much for him, Gregory had a full day of classes, and then he was also playing on the men's varsity volleyball team, so it was very long days for him. Grandpa paid for Gregory's room for those years. Grandpa could be tough, blatantly honest, sometimes a wee bit grumpy, but we knew he loved us. I asked each of my children for a funny story they remembered. My eldest, when I asked him, he remembered the time that I asked Grandpa to fix the vacuum. The handle had broken off, but the vacuum still worked, and I knew Grandpa could fix it. So Grandpa quickly screwed it in place, but he forgot to check it. That's when we realized that he screwed the handle on upside down. Look at this. But that's okay. Gregor was in tears of laughter, but in true Grandpa form and a few well-chosen words, he reattached the handle and it worked perfectly fine again. Jeffrey's memory when he was helping Grandpa do his favorite hobby, selling stuff at the flea market. Grandpa was getting too old to manage all the unpacking and packing up of his wares, so Jeffrey offered to assist. He would watch his grandfather, barter back and forth and negotiate prices. One lady had purchased a vacuum. Now, there's obviously a vacuum theme going on.
Several.
And she had returned it because she felt it wasn't working properly. Grandpa gave her back her money, but the conversation got a little heated. Now, you have to remember, Grandpa's in his late 80s by this point. And after a few well-chosen profanities, which were exchanged by both of them, and I won't repeat it. If you really want to know, talk to me later. Grandpa was feisty. And so he just gave her a few well-chosen words back, and because he was feisty, and because he was a senior, he was not going to back down. He was right, and that was it. Lindsay remembered the time Grandpa showed up at the door looking for his cell phone. We had a little problem with those cell phones. He thought he might have left it in my car because I had taken him to one of his doctor's appointments earlier in the day. It was around dinner time, so I invited him in to stay for supper. I was serving one of those fresh pizzas I just picked up at Costco after his appointment, and he knew I'd picked it up from Costco, and he asked how much I'd paid for it. Always asked the price. I figured he must have liked it. But then when we asked him if he was enjoying it, in true Grandpa form, he says, "Tastes of shit." That was our Grandpa.
That is.
And what I said, Grandpa always states what's on his mind. He had a tough life when he was young, so his demeanor could be very tough as well. But for the past year or so, Grandpa had mellowed, and he was very appreciative of everything we did. He had no problem stating his sincere gratitude. As his health declined, he would let me take care of him a little bit more and a little bit more, and put up less of a fuss when I tried to help him. Whether I was trying to give him a desperately needed haircut, I don't cut hair, but he let me cut his hair. Or when I tucked him into bed because he was just so exhausted. Or I just sat and held his hands trying to warm up his purple fingers. Grandpa's health declined very rapidly during the last 2 months. He went from walking the long hallway in the dining room, because he was in a retirement home for the last 7 months, and he was doing it unassisted, and then he went to needing a walker, and then he went to needing oxygen 24/7. Even to have him over to our house for Father's Day was a huge effort on his part. He no longer wanted to eat. He was exhausted. Even when we celebrated his 95th birthday a couple of weeks ago, he only managed to eat a bite of his favorite food, ice cream. Grandpa had had enough. A few days after that, Grandpa had another fall and ended up in the hospital. The staff there, very nice and kindly, said they recommended that he moved into palliative care because his body was shutting down. I got a call from the hospital one night from the nurse saying that his lungs were becoming congested, but they had given him a couple of meds to help. Alex and Gregory went to visit them the next day. Shortly after they had arrived, Grandpa passed away. In my mind, Grandpa waited for his son to arrive, and then he knew it would be okay to leave. We were very fortunate that Grandpa did not suffer, and he died peacefully. Grandpa will have a special place. I did so well so far. Grandpa will have a special place in our hearts, and he will always be missed. This is my tribute to you. Love, Kim, your favorite daughter-in-law.
Before we say prayers, I'll give you a chance if there's anything that we've missed, but I just want to read another little piece of scripture, and I'm not going to talk much, I promise, just a little teeny bit. I'm obligated. More importantly, there's this psalm, it's Psalm 139, so again, this psalm is thousands of years old, and this is somebody who has discovered that God is present. I don't know what happened, but something happened for this person that suddenly discovers that God is not distant, not an idea, but in fact close and near and powerful. And, well, hear the words. Lord, you have searched me and known me. You know when I sit down and when I rise up, and you discern my thoughts from far away. You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, Lord, you know it completely. You hem me in behind and before, and you lay your hand upon me. Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It's so high I cannot attain it. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If I ascend to heaven, you're there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you're there. If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea, even there your hand shall lead me. Your right hand shall hold me fast. If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night, even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you. It was you who formed my inward parts and knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works. This I know very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes beheld my unformed substance, and in your book were written all the days that were formed for me, when none of them as yet existed. How weighty to me are your thoughts, O God, how vast the sum of them. I try to count them, they're more than the sand. I come to the end, I am still with you. Just love that song. I love that as well as Nick's family and you, friends, as well as you know him, someone knew him even better. Imagine that. Lord, you've searched me and know me. You know when I sit up and when I rise up. You discern my thoughts. You search out my path and my lying down. You're acquainted with all my ways. Even before a word is on my tongue, Lord, you know it completely. Imagine knowing Nick that well. Imagine knowing what he was going to say before he said it. You'd have time to duck. Think how great that would be. Because he could be direct and he could be determined, especially when he had something to say. And God knows that and loves that about him. And imagine knowing all his ways. He had so many ways. We heard them, from tumbling and hiding and pretending to farm but not being able to farm, and washing dishes, but then becoming a cook and not really knowing how to cook, but figure out how to do it. And eventually the man could bake pies, you know? Mastering languages, playing the mute when the right language wasn't available, crossing the Alps. So many ways. So many ways. Running a rooming house, and doing everything for the railway, and being a husband, and a father, and a father-in-law, and best of all, a grandfather. God knows Nick through all of these things and more, and loves him. That's what the psalm says. Where can I go from your spirit? Where can I flee from your presence? If darkness shall cover me, the light around me becomes like night. Even darkness is not dark to you, it said. All around the world, from the Ukraine through Europe to Montreal, Parry Sound, back to Montreal to Toronto, God was there. In the dark, hard times, and he had lots of those. In the good times, he had joyous times. I mean, the escape, the freedom, the coming to Canada, there's a joy in that. Meeting and making a life with Maria, that's a joy. Having a son who would marry so well and produce the grandchildren that would fill his life, that's a joy. Eating pierogies and cabbage rolls and cake.
Yes, that's cabbage.
And cake. Finding the right bit of junk and with a little work turning it not only into a treasure, but also into a profit. Wow. Nick has had a life of light and dark and struggle and joy. And with his hands and his mind, he has overcome every imaginable obstacle. His stories take your breath away. God knows them all and loves him. That's what that psalm said. How weighty are your thoughts, O God, how vast the sum of them. I try to count them, they're more than the sand. I come to the end and I'm with you. We can share more than the psalmist's amazement. We could also share his faith in this moment. I come to the end, it said. I am still with you. If we believe this at all, we could be assured that Nick continues to be with God, embraced by God, loved by God. And we can be glad. And if there's anything in the next life that needs fixing, he's on it. It's good.